What did I say a couple weeks ago? The worst thing you can do when you're fighting a culture war is win it. It's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Worst thing you can do with a culture war is win it, because once you win, you run out of road. And in order to keep the lights on, keep the money coming in, you have to take that culture war into very niche and unpopular areas. Well, that has happened now. Ben Shapiro comes out and says the Derek Chauvin conviction, yes, Derek Chauvin, represents the defining achievement of the woke movement in American politics. The country cannot turn the page on that dark, divisive, and racist era without righting this terrible wrong. Pardon, Derek. Yeah, so you really obviously were the country to turn the page on that dark, divisive, and racist era, you'd be out of business. So it's not so much that the country can't move on, it's that you don't want it to move on because that's your bread and butter. So here is Ben Shapiro with his mug of liberal tears in the foreground, advocating for the pardon of Derek Chauvin, obviously currently serving time for the murder of George Floyd.
Pardons, however. There is one person, if we are issuing pardons, however, there is one person that President Trump should pardon from federal charges forthwith. It would be incredibly controversial, but I think that it's absolutely necessary. That person is Derek Chauvin. President Trump should, in fact, pardon Derek Chauvin. He should. He should pardon him his federal charges. If we are talking about reversing the evils of the last several years in American life, obviously COVID and its handling was a massive evil. Destroyed the economy, set us on a path to fiscal insanity, destroyed children, led to massive health-related cover-ups, just horrifying all the way around. And President Trump has taken on a lot of those things. But when it came to BLM, the inciting event for the BLM riots that caused $2 billion in property damage in the United States and set America's race relations on their worst footing in my lifetime, was in fact the railroading of Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd. The evidence demonstrates that Derek Chauvin did not, in fact, commit murder of George Floyd. George Floyd was high on fentanyl. He had a significant pre-existing heart condition. George Floyd was saying he could not breathe before he was even out of the car. He was in the car saying he could not breathe. Derek Chauvin, for large segments of even the tape that was shown, had his knee on George Floyd's shoulder or back, not on his neck. The autopsy of George Floyd showed that he had no damage to his trachea, that probably George Floyd died of excited delirium.
Okay, that's not what the autopsy said, that he died of excited delirium. There's a lot of straw men here. We could tear them down one by one, but we won't. We'll get into it a little bit at the end. But you kind of get the drift. We'll let this go for another few seconds here.
There were no accusations, even at trial, that Derek Chauvin had committed a hate crime against George Floyd or that he targeted George Floyd because of his race. Nonetheless, on the basis of extraordinarily scanty evidence, and despite the fact that there was massive pressure on the jury, that the mayor of Minneapolis paid a settlement to the George Floyd family immediately, that the president of the United States suggested that Derek Chauvin was guilty, right?
The president of the United States, who was that at the time? Was that President Joe Biden? Oh, no, that was President Donald Trump at the time, saying it doesn't look good, looks really bad. Looks really bad. No, he doesn't say. See, if it was Biden he was talking about, he just said President Biden. He didn't. He said the president of the United States.
Off the bat, that the jurors were being openly threatened and admitted as much. Despite all of that, Derek Chauvin was convicted on federal charges and pled guilty to federal charges. Derek Chauvin should, in fact, be pardoned on that. We will be covering that a lot more in coming weeks, because I think it is worthwhile to remember that there is a man who is rotting in prison because the media decided in the middle of 2020 that they were going to turn a tragic law enforcement stop that ended with the death of a man who had a significant problem with drugs and pre-existing health problems into the raison d'etre of the entire 2020 election. And it led to vast chaos. It led to, again, the destruction of racial comedy in the United States.
Yeah, all right. We heard that the first time. Yeah.
Wait, I want to hear more about the racial comedy.
$2 billion in property damage and a guy rotting in prison who the evidence demonstrates certainly was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in that case. If we're going to talk about delivering pardons, President Trump, I think, should really seriously consider pardoning on federal charges. He can't pardon on state charges. Derek Chauvin, who is convicted of the murder of George Floyd. As I say, we will be covering...
Whatever will we do without... Yeah, black guys do it like this, And
Right.
white guys do it like that jokes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How will we live another day without one of those?
Oh my God. Yeah, he says I love how he says we will be covering this in the weeks to come. Yeah, we feel like there's a lot of ad revenue to be made off of
What a
this.
weird thing to say. Ruin racial comedy.
Well, did he mean comedy COMEDY or did he mean comedy COMITY, right? Isn't that
is that what he
meant?
meant? I thought he meant racial comedy.
Okay, so comedy, comedy defined as courtesy and consideration.
Oh,
Maybe that's what he meant.
I thought you said comedy.
Comedy, like jokes.
I mean, it's,
it was a weird word choice because it does sound like you mean because comedy, ITY, is an uncommon word to use. Yeah. But no, he's very excited. Obviously, they're going to be covering this a lot because there's a lot of ad revenue. There's a lot of clicks and a lot of subscriptions to be gained over, ginning up this culture war back from 5 years ago. Myron Gaines likes the idea. One thing me and Ben Shapiro agree on: pardon Derek Chauvin. The knee on the back didn't kill him. The drugs did. He did not get a fair trial, had a pre-existing heart condition, and had a deadly amount of fentanyl in his system. That combination killed him, not Chauvin. Jack Posobiec, of course. Trump should pardon Derek Chauvin. He had tweeted that a year prior, so this has been on his radar for a while. Here's a lovely person, Matt Walsh. George Floyd was a violent, despicable scumbag who died because he took enough fentanyl to kill a horse. Derek Chauvin is an innocent man sacrificed on the altar of racial justice. Any conservative who still buys into the BLM narrative about this case should be mocked, belittled, and then disregarded forever. Elon gave this a little consideration, something to think about.
What a surprise.
Elon Musk. Yeah, what a surprise. What a surprise. Of course, Donald Trump, not too hot on the idea. Here he is being asked about it.
I say your allies are calling on you to pardon Derek Chauvin. Are you considering pardoning Derek Chauvin?
No, I haven't even heard about it.
No. No.
To pardon Derek Chauvin. Are you considering pardoning Derek Chauvin?
No, I haven't even heard about it. No.
Wow. Threw some cold water on that, huh? So here's a guy I've never heard of, Rob Smith. I don't know who this is. Pardoning Derek Chauvin is a terrible idea. It does nothing for Trump's agenda. It would cause racial strife in America. It is an idea so toxic and destructive, I don't know what Ben Shapiro is thinking. So this is apparently a conservative Trump supporter who kind of sniffs out what Shapiro's motives are, and as well as all these other influencers who, stand to get a lot of online engagement from whipping people up into a frenzy over Derek Chauvin's supposed innocence.
There is absolutely nothing beneficial that pardoning Chauvin would do for the Trump administration, for this country, for race relations, for anybody else. It is absolutely destructive. It makes no sense. And so for me, when I first saw this, generally conversations that happen come from the ground up. Usually there's some sort of murmuring under, and then it kind of like bubbles up, and then it becomes a national conversation. This seems to be a very top-down conversation that comes from somebody with an enormous amount of influence. This is nothing that anybody was talking about or thinking about. So it really makes me question, why is this conversation happening right now? It makes me question, why did Ben Shapiro want to start this conversation right now? Who does this benefit? Doesn't benefit Trump, doesn't benefit America, doesn't benefit race relations, it doesn't benefit anything. And the last point I'll make on it is this. There are very few people that can actually really speak to in depth what was going on in that trial, how George Floyd actually died, et cetera, et cetera. There's probably 5 people that have, spent the bulk of their day on a podcast set every single day, like Ben Shapiro, like maybe 2 or 3 other people that can really talk to you in depth about this. So then they're positioning themselves to say, no, listen to me. I'm the one who really knows about this. So what? Trump's agenda is supposed to be derailed. Where we're at as a country right now is supposed to be derailed because these leftists and these Democrats are looking for a reason to have another race war. That is what they love. So why this conversation is happening right now, I have no idea.
You're not for it at all?
No.
Interesting.
I'm not.
Interesting. I was thinking of maybe getting in on some of that action myself. Interesting, but you're not for it.
I was hoping you'd be one of those black guys who'd be for it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
When I invited you on, that was my assumption.
My assumption was I could say my black friend thinks Derek Chauvin is innocent as well. Kind
You're
of
not
left
going to
me
give me
hanging
that,
there.
huh?
Kind of left me hanging there. No, but this guy, I mean, I think he's touching on, he doesn't come out and say it, but I think he's warm. Like, yeah, who does this benefit except podcasters and influencers who profit off of division and culture
Right,
war hysteria?
right,
That's clearly
right.
what this is about. Pretty obvious and pretty desperate. And this is something that, like you said, was going to happen. You said, what's going to happen when Trump wins and the culture shifts in the right's direction? What are all these right-wing culture warriors going to do? Right? Because the worst thing you can do in a culture war is win. Right?
Right.
Because you have to keep it going and you have to take it to unpopular places. That happened with the
Right.
liberals. Now it's happening with MAGA.
Yeah, they're,
this is part
they're
of how
entering
the
their
pendulum keeps
drag.
swinging. Right.
Yeah, they're entering their drag show for kids' face.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what this is. Exactly what this is. And like I said, we're not going to go point for point here with Ben Shapiro making the case that Derek Chauvin is an innocent man. But I am going to play a little bit of this because there's a documentary, The Fall of Minneapolis, that got a lot of play. And Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter hosted the filmmakers. Now, we love Lowry. Lowry's a fan. Glenn and Luan, his lovely wife, we hosted them on a podcast of ours. And so, this is not to beat up on them. This is more to critique the filmmakers, and they just happen to be the ones asking the questions. So here we're going to get a little taste, just to give you a sense of what you're dealing with when you have people come out here and try and act like Derek Chauvin did not kill George Floyd. Okay, like I said, we can go point for an hour. We're not going to do that. But this is kind of a revealing little piece here.
Really say that shortness of breath didn't kill that man, especially because given all the stuff that was in him and how upset he was, that probably put him to the halfway point anyway. Can we really say that those officers did not cause him to go from sick and out of breath to dead? This is a genuine question.
Sure, if I may, let's get back to empirical evidence, first of all. And with respect to all the witness testimony, let's just grant them everything they said is actually factually accurate 100%. We still have a contention nonetheless. We have Dr. Andrew M. Baker, who is the pathologist, the only pathologist to actually examine George Floyd. So I would submit everything else thereafter is exactly that, conjecture. Unless you were actually materially involved in that autopsy, you're entitled to any opinion you'd like, however expert or however amateur it may be. Back to the autopsy report. It does not say the word homicide at all.
Wrong.
And then we have a very, very peculiar situation with this report. And the case title reads something like cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. It does not say asphyxiation. Now, I know Ellison would like to say, well, it doesn't have to, because his attorneys actually argue this is just a style issue. The fact that Baker doesn't mention this is just a matter of style. That's very interesting way of handling exculpatory evidence. But let's back up for a second. The first words in this report under the case title from the only pathologist who examined George Floyd says cardiopulmonary arrest.
Okay, this is all such garbage. It's such garbage. Like, you don't have to be an expert on this to know this is garbage. You can do a few minutes of cursory research on this to know that this is just absolute garbage. So what does it say next to cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement, subdual, restraint, and neck compression? Does not say asphyxiation. It says compression. Cause of death is what it says over on the left. Now, if you read the very advanced paper called Forensics for Dummies, it breaks this down. So the most important function of the medical examiner in any death investigation is determining the cause, mechanism, and manner of death. Here are definitions of each of these terms. So cause of death, which is what it says right here, cause of death, right? The disease or trauma that directly caused the victim's death. Examples include a heart attack, a gunshot wound to the head, or a drug overdose. So if someone shot you in the head on purpose, the cause of death wouldn't say homicide. The cause of death would be gunshot wound
Right.
to the head.
The gunshot. Right.
Now, if you go down to manner of death, that is how the cause of death came about. The 5 manners of death are natural, accidental, suicidal, homicidal, and undetermined. A gunshot wound, the cause of death, may have been accidental, suicidal, or homicidal, for example. Only deaths from disease are natural. So what does it actually say on the medical examiner report 5 days or 4 days, whatever it was, after George Floyd's death? Cause of death, cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement subdual restraint and neck compression, which is what was cited right there. That's what was cited right there as the cause of death. And what is listed as the manner of death? Homicide. Homicide. So what they're saying there is absolute bullshit. It is debunkable within minutes. Within minutes.
Right. Right.
This was linked to in an NPR article on June 1st, 2020. Now, some people say, why do you trust NPR? I don't trust NPR. They hyperlinked to the primary source, which is the document that clearly states this was deemed a homicide from the very fucking beginning. And this is what we told you in the last segment. We talked about Rogan and Elon, where because the media's credibility has tanked, the mainstream media's credibility has tanked, it has opened up a space for complete lying scumbags to just take an issue that everyone thinks they know about and say, you actually don't know the real story of this. I know the real story of this. And it takes 2 minutes to debunk what the guy's saying. The guy said the word homicide does not appear in the autopsy. This is the medical examiner's report. This was the press release issued days after the killing. It says right there, manner of death, homicide. He plays this very tricky word game. He does an RFK, plays a very tricky word game. Well, they listed cause of death as cardiopulmonary arrest. They didn't say homicide. You don't list homicide under cause of death. You list that under manner of death. I don't know. I didn't know any of this until this morning. And now I know it. That's how easy it is to debunk this bullshit. And these grifting scumbags just say whatever the fuck they want with zero regard for consequence. And you have rich fucks like Shapiro and Walsh and whoever that Myron Gaines guy, Jack Posobiec, they just feed this nonsense. And it's absolute nonsense. You have to be aware of this.
Yeah. What's really sad and upsetting and somewhat frustrating, especially being in this space, like we don't have the option of just like unplugging from the conversation. You have so many people who, modern circumstances, maybe it's the technology. I mean, it's certainly partly the technology. It's partly the economics. A lot of people just have no life, and that makes them really susceptible to being psyoped this way because they have nothing else. They have nothing else but to follow all the twists and turns of all the rage bait that's being thrown at them by people who profit from their rage. And that's where you see all these people who had no opinion about things 3 minutes ago are very convinced of what they just heard from some guy on X. They're passionate about it. We'll fight you about this shit. Never heard of it a week ago. Never heard of it a week ago. Who was saying, no, it wasn't really a homicide? Then you started to hear this bubbling up because some people, and now it's going mainstream within influencer terms. You've got Shapiro promoting it. So what happened with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? I still get people who know not a fucking thing about it going, yeah, well, that, what do you think? Everything else is corrupted. That's not like, dude, you never heard of this shit a month ago. You never heard of it. And you're an expert. Everyone's an expert now. And that's part of what they're trading on, because people who don't have a lot going on in their life want to feel like they have a basis for one-upsmanship, right? So, no, I've got the real truth. You know who I got it from? Elon. I got it from Rogan. I got it from Donnie. These people are just using you, man. You're just the slaves in an Egyptian mural, right? You're the ones carrying the litter. That's all you are to these guys. But we have a population that's just really vulnerable to that, man. It's sad and it's dangerous. It's
Yeah.
very dangerous because people who are that programmable, what can you not program them to do?
Yeah, and they're not hip to these cheap lawyer tricks. Well, they didn't list asphyxiation. He said I can't breathe before he was on the floor. Well, after Eric Garner, I can't breathe became, a phrase that people would use. That could have been his way of sending out a smoke signal, right? You don't know. It doesn't matter why he said it. Maybe he was fucked up on drugs. Who knows? Or who cares why he said that? What we know is the guy leaned on his back. Let's say he didn't lean on his neck. Let's take your word for it.
We've all seen the video.
We've all seen a video for compression of the neck. The bottom line is there was pressure applied to a guy who, yes, maybe he had a bum heart, maybe he was on drugs, and maybe that made it worse. But absent the knee on the back, if you want to call it the back and not the neck, I'll grant you that. Fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Absent that action, he is not a dead man. Therefore, Derek Chauvin killed him. Now, you want to make the argument he was overcharged and that it was more reckless than intentional, and so maybe a manslaughter charge is more appropriate than a homicide charge. That's not what they're saying. That's not what they're saying. They're saying he's an innocent man who was basically, caught up in a race war, and that he should be free. And they're using that. It's funny that that guy said that the left wants a race war. Kind of seems like you guys want a race war. We haven't gotten to this story, and we won't get to it tonight because we got a lot to get to. But we are going to get to Donald Trump's new open borders policy for white South African farmers. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Isn't it weird that the guy who bought his presidency is a white South African? And all of a sudden this issue, another one that nobody had an opinion on a month ago, people are ready to fight you over this shit?
Full citizenship.
Never heard of a month ago. Never heard of
full citizenship for white South African farmers.
Knew nothing about land
says.
policy in South Africa a month ago. Now this is something they're willing to go to the mat over.
Yep.
Everyone's an expert on South African land policy now because Elon said some shit about it.
Yep.
Please clap.